Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hi, Hugh. Good morning from Manila.
Good morning. How are you?
Long time, 30 plus years, or maybe even more.
That's right. So it's been a while. It's great to catch up with you.
Yeah. I know you're a very famous CEO of United Energy and doing a lot of interesting stuff. Maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hugh Gleeson, in the utility sector for decades now, many decades. I worked for United Energy for a long time, from privatisation in Victoria, Australia. So when it was privatised back in the 1990s, I was the CEO for 12 years up until I retired in 2015. And so since 2015, I've had a non-executive career and been on a number of boards around the utility space, electricity distributor in New South Wales, Energy Queensland. So yes, a range of businesses, principally in that energy and utility space, and also been involved with some super funds along the way in that process. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, amazing. How does it feel to see the ACCV logo back? You and I both worked in the State Electricity Commission of Victoria many years ago.
It's a bit strange to see it back because I think we saw that we progressed enormously and did substantial reforms in the 90s, and the energy sector's been continually changing since then. It's been a journey of transformation. We're all behind. I particularly don't like it as a reminder of the past, because I think we've improved and we've progressed enormously since those times. It doesn't actually sit very well with me seeing the logo again. I'd love it to be something new and different and exciting rather than dredging back the past, because it's not the past. It is a very different animal.
It's a very different animal, because that's one thing I wanted to ask you. When I joined ACCV 88, I was maybe one of the very late person coming in. It was all about coal. There was nothing beyond that.
Correct. It was a big government organisation and it was building coal-fired power stations. And I was involved in the mining side. We had a map of the Latrobe Valley now. Those ideas, we've left those long behind.
Yeah. So the amazing thing is, at that time, of course, solar did not exist. There was no sort of thinking beyond coal. We are trying to do a bit of energy efficiency in the demand planning department, but it's a tiny thing, right? But from there, right now, Australia has 1.2 kilowatt per capita rooftop solar, one of the highest in the world. It's a very different world.
The point that you make there, I find interesting, because there are a lot of people in this country that sort of see us as laggards. But in fact, there's a number of those metrics where Australia's leading the world in terms of the amount of rooftop solar, the level of distributed network that we have, substantial progress that we've made. It's just that we started from being grid that was dominated by coal, and there's only so fast you can wind it back. Now, obviously, there's been some clumsiness in policy along the way, but despite the clumsiness in policy, we've made enormous progress in terms of where we've got to now.
Yeah, thinking is different. I have a house in Melbourne. I added solar some time back. I was adding batteries, and then suddenly I got an offer. Oh, do you want to sign up for this virtual power plant agreement? We'll give you $500 a year, and we might call upon you as an interruptible load for 5 times a year. These are theories people, other countries thinking about. No one will call you, for those sort of offer other than, I think, California or somewhere, right? So Australia, this is happening, right?
It's happening, but that's got its own set of challenges too. And there's probably a whole podcast just on that particular topic as to virtual power plants. But yes, that's right. But we're heading down that path as fast as we can, let's say. But that's got a new set of challenges and barriers to get through.
And then, of course, the other thing is the vehicle to grid, your electric vehicle. How does it integrate? What's your views on the future of electric vehicle? How are we going in Australia?
I think we've still got to work our way through a number of things. How we're going with probably policies around EVs, the country's probably been slow. But at the end of the day, you then get to the point that sort of says we have to free these things up We have to the right platform policies in there, but at the end of the day, we don't manufacture cars here. Those cars are getting manufactured in other parts of the world. And so we've just got to make sure we've got the environment that sets it up so that they can get here as quickly as possible. And certainly the more and more I drive around the streets, and I drive an electric vehicle and my wife drives an electric vehicle. And as we drive around the streets, we see more and more of our brothers and sisters out there with almost identical cars. And so it's happening. And so we will go up that curve. It's then a matter of what that means for integrating it into the electricity system in terms of getting the charging cycles right. So it's a benefit to the grid, not a burden on the grid. Then seeing if we can use the battery capability. Now, I must admit, the day that it dawned on me, when you think about household batteries, that the car that I've got sitting there has actually got about 5 times the battery capacity of what people are installing as household batteries. And the day I realised the size of that battery, just a lot of the household batteries being put out there, and there was the story in the US that if I've got this right, how much does a household battery cost? You can get one from Ford so much, and you get an F-150 pickup truck for free with the battery. Because essentially, when you look at the cost of the F-150 electric, it was a pretty good price when you looked at the cost of household batteries. And that's got a significant potential, but harnessing that potential, there's only so much you'll be able to harness, but still, if you can harness a portion of it, that's got a significant benefit to the grid. But it's then setting up the structures and arrangements to even get that portion of it. Because if you get my car and being an early adopter of electric vehicles, I think about these issues a lot. Not being a burden on the grid and the charging at right times is just really easy to do if you put the tariff structures there. But there was always the talk on, do you do your washing in the middle of the night? No, the tariff structure is really going to encourage people to do the washing in the middle of the night. And no, people opt for convenience and they're not going to do that. But there's no inconvenience in pressing the button on your car that says it's going to charge at 1 a.m. Where we need to get to, of course, is that I'm pressing the buttons on the car that probably has it charging 1 p.m. But the tariff structures aren't there for that yet. And the tariff structures tell me to do it in the middle of the night. They really should be telling me to do it in the daytime, but we haven't got there yet. So we're very clumsy in how we put these things in place. But once they're there, it's just so easy to respond to them. The barriers to that are just minimal once you've got the incentives there. Getting that, we've still got some of those things to make happen to get that right.
Yeah, but the infrastructure is there. People's understanding is there. And of course, you are a CEO of all the companies. But even I went to my kids' school, mothers group, parents group, they're discussing what battery to buy. So the general awareness in Australia is very high as an early adopter country.
But getting the arrangements then with the talk of the battery to then use it to really positively contribute to the grid in terms of vehicle to grid, then at the end of the day, I'm still going to go for my convenience. If I want to drive the car in the middle of the day, I'm going to drive it in the middle of the day sort of thing. And it's got to be parked in the right spot and plugged in at the right time. If it's going to get used in the middle of the day to actually distribute vehicle to grid, obviously I've got the infrastructure there. We haven't got that yet. But even then, there will be a barrier there because at the end of the day, my convenience is going to be a barrier to that. Because will I have it sitting in the right place where it's connected to the right thing and it's plugged in and it's all set up ready to go? That's a different ball game because at the end of the day, I just raced in and I didn't realize it was going to be a day that it needed, or I'm out or whatever it might be. Convenience for people is always going to be number one. They don't think the electricity system's sexy. That's not going to be their number one issue. It's their own comfort and convenience is going to be number one. So you've got to make these things really easy. And some of that you just can't necessarily make it easy because their convenience will come first.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The other point you make is quite interesting, right? You can get a $40,000 car comes with a 65 kilowatt hour battery where you try to buy a Tesla Powerwall still cost you $15,000 Australian for a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the numbers I feel that people don't think about much is what is the average daily consumption, which is 10, 15 kilowatt hour roughly, unless you have a huge swimming pool which needs continuous heating, right? And then if your car has almost a week's supply there, it's a very different world in terms of people getting nervous about value of lost load and interruption, blah, blah, blah.
I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said there. And one of the factors is when we're dealing with the individual's self-sufficiency, or is it how the whole grid works? Because at the end of the day, we're wanting, if this is all going to work, we actually want to be able to contribute back into the grid. But for the whole of the grid, and for every one person that might have that capability, there's a whole bunch that don't. And there's a whole bunch of industry and commercial businesses and whatever. And so you need to get the whole thing to work, not just the individual self-sufficiency, because they're not going to cut the wire anyway. And so that changes those numbers a bit when you look at it. The other issue in there that it triggered for me is that managing batteries is actually hard. Now, the battery in my car, by the time Tesla tell me that I shouldn't be using the top 20% and I should never let it get down near the bottom 20%, and then I allow for the various buffers and things, I immediately have a working capacity in that battery of probably 50% of what it says. And I know from, we talk about what the future grid looks like, and we talk about it, but batteries as being a key factor in it. And yes, absolutely, they will be a key factor, but we need to learn about how to manage batteries. The energy sector needs to look to the water sector to start to learn about these things, because if I think of my own house, if I am being self-sufficient here and I'm planning for that next outage, how long is that outage going to last for? Is it going to last for a couple of hours? Is it going to last for 24 hours, or is it going to last a week? And think of the Millennium Drought here in Melbourne and managing our water storages through the Millennium Drought. It started off, we had a really bad year, and look how much the water storages have gone down. How big a problem do we have here? Then we had another bad year and another bad year. And then we got to the point, hold on, is it a step change? Because we had 10 years of this. And is it a step change down? We had a couple of years of rain, and oh no, it was just temporary. A lot of the modelling that's done on how we're going to run the power system with batteries and other renewables is done with perfect hindsight. The world doesn't have perfect hindsight. The foresight that you do not know how long this wind drought is going to go for. You don't know how long we're going to have days of very low production. Managing your batteries through that is really hard. So when we think of the mix of things, batteries are critical and really important, but we've got to understand the complexities of managing them and realise that there are going to be other irons in that fire too, to be able to manage our way through what we haven't got perfect foresight of.
I completely agree. But at the same time, I've driven my Tesla to 1% power in a rural New South Wales. In the Tesla saying, you should not be driving, this is not good for battery health. I said, yeah, I know. But because what's happening, batteries were very expensive. I did an electric vehicle project in the Philippines. Batteries was $1,000 a kilowatt hour then. But yesterday I was talking to someone, they're buying batteries from top tier companies at $56 a kilowatt hour for an off-grid project in Africa. So as the prices come down, BMS, the battery management system, will get better. People will worry less about or damaging this super expensive equipment. So that's one. Because the thing that I find very interesting, Australian domestic customers is about 30% of load, roughly. And our NEM, the National Electricity Market, is such, so the maximum demand is 33,000 megawatt, roughly. Of course, there's a reserve capacity of another maybe 20 in the system. The rooftop solar is already 34,000 megawatt, but 20,000 of those, I think, is on the back of the meter, right behind the meter. Only 11,000 coming to the grid and creating all sorts of havoc and the charts on LinkedIn. No? But people will keep adding. People will keep adding. So I'm just thinking, will it be one day that our distribution and transmission network job will be suck all this excess electricity for people, homes and cars and others, a major part of it, centrally dispatch it to the industries or sort of buildings where they really can't produce enough to meet their needs. So rooftop solar could be quite significant, no, Hugh?
Absolutely. But coordinating that and actually managing that so that it works is really hard. We've got areas in Queensland now where the peak load on the distribution network is solar export.
Yep.
So solar export is running a higher current through the wires than peak demand is. at the peak time of the day. But then actually, building the capacity of the network to utilize all that is how much of it and what capacity do you seek to utilize? Because you're not going to build capacity just to take the peak, just because someone wants to send it out if it hasn't got anywhere to go, and if that's only going to happen once a blue moon. So what are we actually going to build for and plan for? And then how do you manage it on a real-time basis so that you make efficient and reliable use of that rather than just responding to almost random flows that are going on? So it's actually a benefit rather than a hindrance. So there's a lot between this coming randomly and this actually being well utilized and as an efficient resource. A lot's got to happen between those two.
Yeah, but this definition of efficient resource and allocations comes from the principle that it's a scarce resource. But if it is not, right? Because I remember I had more than 10 years ago in this apartment, I had a solar panel. I used for the fun of it, one fan, one light. And one day I was about to switch it off in the morning and I said, why am I switching it off? It's free. It's a zero marginal cost.
That's a good point. Reprogramming the brains of people like me that thought of things as scarce resources and recognizing that some things won't necessarily be that. But still, the efficient use that I'm talking about is just how much capacity are we going to build to take that? So the scarce resource is the capacity on the network, because we've got to make an investment decision. Do we build it just because this might come along at some time? But the other point that raises too that we've got to reprogram ourselves a bit on is that if we really do end up with a lot of very low cost generation, and not just low cost in terms of zero marginal cost, but if we actually end up sort of low capital cost too, potentially, then when you start thinking that way, you've then got to build that into your design of your system, and that's all well and good. But the obvious answer to some of that is in trying to optimize this scarce resources, as was implied in the thinking a few seconds ago. The easiest answer to all of that is just build over capacity. And we talk about batteries and will the batteries get us through the wind droughts and things, and how do we manage all that when we have a wind shortage year? Potentially one of the easiest ways to, and we talk about battery storage, long duration storage, and getting into hydro and those sorts of things, and pump storage. One of the easiest answers to solve that whole thing, and again, referring to droughts and how you manage storage, is just, if you've got capacity, just build over capacity. But of course, then we've always built electricity systems with over capacity. We always had a capacity reserve there. We always have reserve plans. That's where we logically end up when you do the economics going forward, is a lot of spare capacity. At the moment, there's a concept of, I've got these renewable resources and I should be able to get them out to the system the whole time, and I don't care if no one wants it or there's not a way to get it to market. Someone has to take it. Once you're ultimately running your system with a whole bunch of spare capacity and you've overbuilt, which, as I say, if the cost is really low, that's the easiest way to make the system reliable. You're still going to have batteries. You need less batteries if you've got overcapacity, but then you've got to get to the acceptance that you're going to be curtailed. And so then you've got to think as to how we manage curtailment. And I know people are thinking about that, but still there's a lot more thinking to be done about that, and a whole lot more reprogramming of people's psyche to accept that they're going to be curtailed. And that's a good thing, because they're actually carrying reserve for the system, and that's a good thing too. You see how you get the value of that, and you'll be rewarded for the reserve that you're carrying for the system, sort of thing. All of that got a lot to work through.
Yeah, eventually the solar could become almost like what the power stations are doing, bidding negative amount just to stay on or something. Because so much solar coming through, eventually.
Yeah. I've done a bit of work in the Northern Territory and the power system up there. The Northern Territory, it's a whole lot smaller grid, and it doesn't take too many solar farms to right through the transition to the other end and see what it looks like on the other side. And there's only a few solar farms between where they are now and coming out the other side. You start to realise that the whole system runs completely differently, because it can have much wind up there. It's absolutely set up for solar and not for wind. Therefore, you've got the system that's dominated by solar. And so, therefore, high generation in the middle of the day, zero generation at night time. How do we manage the difference between that and the load profile that looks the opposite? It takes you straight to that point, what your tariff structures are, what your issue of how much storage you need, how you get that balancing, all those sorts of things have to occur, and stands out. It starts to become simple again. This is the transition that's complex. The end game is simple, but it's just a totally different looking world than what we see today.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the bit that excites me, saying all the people don't know what they're doing, but eventually so many of them doing it. When Australia will have, say, 60% electric vehicle and induction charge, you may be able to driving on Eastern Freeway and charging or discharging. You have developed theoretically another power distribution network. No one knows how that looks like. And in that environment, how do you do long-term system planning? Because the risk of stranded assets come from all directions. Because I don't know what the regulators will do in their reevaluation. How do you optimize a network? What sort of horizon technology is changing? No, it's a fascinating world we are in, no?
You talk about that, Don, and one of the things that comes into play there, and whilst technology is rapidly changing, I put technology in a couple of baskets when I think of these utilities. And I know in running electricity utilities, and we had people from telcos come into our business and sit on our board, and they talked about the rate of change and to be alert of these things. But there's a lot that goes into a power system where the cost of what goes in there is simply based on the amount of steel and the amount of aluminium and the amount of wood, and you can think of it in so many dollars a ton. And so there's a limiting capital cost just associated with the wires and the poles and those sorts of things. And they're big dollars, and you can only deal with that in terms of amortizing that over decades. We've traditionally amortized that over 40 to 70 year amortization. We're still going to need all that stuff in the future. We're obviously going to have a whole lot of smarts that sit on top of this, which are going to change totally how we manage it and how we manage the loads through that hardware. And those smarts then much lower capital cost and their IP type costs and those sorts of things, and they're not dominated by the cost of hardware. And so you're balancing out this system where you've still got to have the physical assets. This is just the nature of physics, and pushing power through power lines needs substantial hardware that has substantial costs that's amortized over long periods of time. But what that then impacts is that will drive those things to become long life. Whilst you might change some of this technology, you've still got to have in the new version, when you make that one stranded, the new one that you've got to build still got to have a whole bunch of that heavy, high cost infrastructure that's amortized over a long period of time. So are you just going to flip this one out to flip that one in to then create a new set of risks associated with that? And you tend to, it's almost like the nuclear deterrent theory, but if each of those things blow each other up, then it all blows up sort of thing. Therefore, there ends up being a certain level of stability in terms of that physical hardware. Lots of changes to the smarts that sit on top of it. There'll be a natural tendency to not have that stranded asset problem because it's triggering a nuclear war. Now, ultimately, that says that the grid that we're building is going to be a multi-purpose grid. We're certainly not going to go out and have a grid that's just purely for one-directional flows anymore. We're going to make sure it can do the two-directional flows. And if you've got those other things happening, it's set there ready to allow those things to connect in easily. And so you've got to plan those things well. But at the end of the day, there is the nuclear deterrent theory that you're just not going to throw away large chunks of network to replace them with another large chunk of network that's equally susceptible to stranded asset risk. So, that there will natural discipline over all those things. But sitting on top of that will be a whole different bunch of smarts, and it will be very much a two-way grid, but with withdrawals and inflows at all sorts of different points across those networks.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's what I tried to do, trying to convince some of the old Russian system planners, saying, while you are head down, think world has changed, not just changed, and it's changing so fast. Some people really do not appreciate that change. Still, they have some theories, difficult to integrate without digging around. No?
That's right. And I look at this just to describe what I just went through in a slightly different way. Now, I've often looked at it in terms of the electricity network's going to be like the internet. Everyone's going to want to do different things. And what you do across the top of that will be totally different, but everyone will want to inject in withdrawal from the network. So they want to be connected to it, and they'll all want to be connected at different points. But if it's ubiquitous across there, then it allows you to do that. And where you inject in and where you withdraw and how you manage what you inject in and withdraw will change totally over time. But if you've got the ubiquitous network that joins that all up, then that can be quite stable underneath that. It's how I picture it, the differentiated between the hardware at the bottom and the smarts and the usage at the top.
So I like that. Electricity network will be the new internet. How do you keep up this energy? You tell me. I have not seen you for 30, 40 years, but I see the same Hugh.
I've always enjoyed this. I enjoy exercising the brain. I get into discussions like this, and I'll note some of the things that I'm saying now. Those thoughts are being stimulated on the spot rather than ones that I had banked away there, sort of thing. It's a really interesting topic.
Yes. So what else do you do for fun other than working now? I know you are retired.
I must admit, until very recently, I had probably been on too many boards. And so it's only quite recently that I've stepped down my workload a bit. Dare I suggest that, my work was my fun. I was just doing it at a slightly slower pace that allowed me to breathe between activities, but there still wasn't a whole lot of room between activities to do a whole lot of things different, but certainly trying to enjoy life a bit more and getting away for holidays and trips and various things like that. Even trying to get my golf game going again, but that's not going very well.
Are you traveling much these days?
Up until the end of last year, I was doing a lot of travel for work and still would get in one or two overseas trips a year for holidays. But now I've wound back a bit at the moment, and so my load's gone down. Might pick up again a bit at some stage, but it's gone down. So not doing the work travel anywhere near as much as I was, but still certainly looking to do the holiday travel, although this year we haven't got a major holiday planned. Other years we certainly have had one or two. Just this year we've been tied up with buying and selling houses. I think we're moving. So I didn't realise how big a project that is when you've got decades of accumulated stuff for you and 3 kids who have abandoned the house and left all their stuff there, as to how big a project that is.
That is a huge project. I can personally relate to this right now. You just said you are about to move houses. Now, you have seen in the simple form how house hunting, how the AI has changed the whole thing, right? You touch something and instantly they say, oh, this might fit you, this might fit you. So what's your view on AI in general? How is that coming in? I know electricity industry is very exciting, but AI has become even way, way more.
Look, I've got to say I'm still trying to get my mind around AI and work out what it is and what it isn't. In terms of a tool, if I think it just as a natural progression of IT and data management that we've always had, but we're progressing further. We can do more and more complex analysis, deeper drawing on greater data sets, and certainly that can be really beneficial to business, to people, and can be of enormous benefit. But there are some really scary bits of AI too when you start to then look at the sort of take things to deep fake levels and those sorts of things. It's then a matter of how you actually control that. And I do find it interesting that the AI sector themselves have been calling out for regulation. It's not often such a laissez-faire area is calling out for regulation. That's something that we should be alert to, and governments need to start getting their head around. And the challenging bit is how you get your head around it and how you actually do that. But it's certainly something that's got to happen. But as an opportunity for business to do things smarter and to make a better use of data, really some very powerful tools there and very exciting opportunities for business. I feel like I'm only on the edge of understanding what those opportunities are and how you harness them, but very interesting.
Yeah, because just the conversation that you and I are having with our head talking, this can be recreated with an AI. The technology is ready today. And the deepfake that you mentioned, no one will have a clue. Your voice, your face, your gestures. I personally think all business deals, maybe in near future, has to be almost people will not sign anything unless they have shaken hands face to face. No, it's scary in that aspect.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. At some point, we start reverting back to because we don't trust anything in front of us. I recall someone saying to me a while ago, just when they were talking about cybersecurity issues, that they were starting to train, some of the top navies in the world were starting to train their cruisers how to use sextants and physical navigation, because at the end of the day, the high tech that they've relied on might be brought down before their eyes. No, I just look in two directions on this AI. That's one is the sort of the opportunities, or what are the smart things it can do, and then what are the sort of can we do with it? If I want to rely on it to do something for me, what do I need to do? And how do I get benefits from it in business? And then you look in the other direction as to what might happen if someone, how might I get scammed, and all those sorts of things. But if I go to even just looking into the data management, at the end of the day, it still takes people to program these things. Is everyone going to be down at a job? At the end of the day, it's still only doing what humans have done before. It's just doing it quickly, or it's drawing on that. So that's why some of the stuff that when people ask the AI system to tell it something, it can just produce nonsense, because it's going and grabbing stuff that's already been produced before and potentially putting it together in a nonsense way, or just grabbing something that's wrong and giving it to you because it can find it out there really easily. There's still judgments and things involved. And ultimately, the beneficial things it does is still driven by the algorithms that people put into it and what we ask it. And typically, through history, as we've developed more tools to do things for it, I think it was my final year of school that the pocket calculator came along. And we all went out, and math students paid big money for pocket calculators and what was going to happen here, and could we use them in exams and all those sorts of things. And we just take that, we just accept that as a given now. And of course, we use the pocket calculator, and then you build on that and you do more things. But that there's no way to put us out of a job. And there's no way a whole lot of these computers are putting us out of a job. And it's just that we start to do the next layer on. And there's a whole industry, of course, then involved in actually programming it and driving those new machines that are created for us. And I think we can be too quick to assume that it's going to put everyone out of jobs or it's going to change the world. It's a new set of tools that can be very valuable, but it's also, as we said, a new set of tools that can be a bit dangerous too, that need some sort of harnessing. But it's part of our evolution. I say that as a bit of an amateur in this space.
I completely agree. It's a tool. It has to be used. Everyone must use it. Otherwise, you'll be left behind, because the way it is progressing. And look at Uber, look at Airbnb, look at Zoom. This thing existed because of the computer compression technology, the bandwidth and all of those. It created so many jobs that was not there.
That's right. And it doesn't take long to ask the question as to how did I ever survive without this?
But I would suggest, if you have not already, have you tried Pi, the AI? Have a play with Pi AI. I recorded one full podcast with Pi talking about some of the things, zero marginal cost solar and others. It is scary at a point. I was sitting here and saying, I can continue this discussion literally forever. This thing will never run out of energy or ideas. And to have that access to that resources. And I actually said, okay, thank you, Pi. It also said, thank you. And I was like talking to a person. So that fascinates me, scares me at the same time, saying where it will take us. This is something, it's beyond our physical realm of thinking, no? The speed.
Yep, that's a whole different ballgame. But we'll get used to it at some stage, and it'll be second nature to us.
Yeah, as long as we don't create another layer of digital divide, people have to get onto it, because otherwise be inferior to the next door person who's becoming a superhuman with a better tool. Is there anything else that I could have asked?
One of the things that I ran through my mind as well, where do I think we're sitting now, and going back to our power systems and things. And I think overall, as I said before, Australia has progressed well. We've still got a long way to go. And some of this stuff gets a whole lot harder. We are behind where we would like to be. And a lot of this is going to get harder. But at the same time, we've got to make that journey. And I think our political environment and our policy environment, whilst I see a lot of roadblocks and a lot of things make me tear my hair out, I think it's improving and helping pave the way for getting to where we need to be. But yeah, there are some things that frustrate me. I'd like to get some of those barriers out of the road and move it through more quickly.
Yeah, I'm so tempted. We had a long conversation, but I still will ask you just a few minutes views on hydrogen, because that's another 5-hour discussion. But what's your high-level views on hydrogen? Just a quick one before we finish.
Hydrogen is something we've got to make work, and it certainly seems like a big opportunity But as I've looked at it, and I'm not that close to it, it's left me scratching my head at times. People can think through and project. You think, hold on, does this really work? And just the physics of hydrogen, if you can transport natural gas, you should be able to transport hydrogen. But there's aspects of the physics that say that you know, the temperatures that you have to have it at, the conversions at either end of those things make long distance transport look horrifically expensive. Does that make sense at all? And so there are a number of aspects of hydrogen where I think, has someone really thought this through? But still, there are enough areas with that. I think there's a lot of sorting out to go. And I think a lot of ideas that are out there potentially fall away because they don't work, but it still potentially leaves things that will work. And certainly when we look at our fuel mix or our energy mix, we've got a lot of eggs in one basket if we think that everything we're going to ever do is going to run off wind and solar. Even then, hydrogen's running off wind and solar too. But we need more irons in that fire. And hydrogen has to be one of those. Yeah, and if you look at just hard to abate sectors, hydrogen's going to be key for those. Some of those things may get more expensive, and so the economics may adjust such that our cost structures change because we've ended up adopting hydrogen in a place where we need to adopt hydrogen and we haven't got other alternatives, and that may impact on cost structures that are going to change over time. And so we've got to accept that. So I think it's a big opportunity, but there's a lot of dust to settle and a lot of work. And there are sort of things that are already we're seeing falling away that look like great ideas. I think the thing that's confused me a bit on hydrogen is that normally one of my tests for these things, when I think that these ideas really make sense, I then look around and I say, is anyone spending money on it? And in hydrogen, we've seen some people have spent some really big money. And you think if someone putting real money on the table, it's not just a government doing it for political reasons, it's investors putting real money on the table, then that says there must be something here. That theory hasn't actually proved true. And whilst people have put some big money on the table, those things aren't necessarily going to be successful in the long term. So it's not the measure of success that I would normally have successfully applied in the past. I don't think it's quite working in some of these hydrogen bets because some of them don't look like they're going to work.
Yes, and to make hydrogen competitive with others, electricity, solar input needs to be 0.25 cents a kilowatt hour or something last time I checked. So that's not happening in a hurry.
No, that's right. You start approaching the limits of some of these sorts of things. And look at the steps in producing that. We've talked about efficiency before. There's so many the low utilization steps in those processes. The energy that's being produced in the first place, it's low utilization generation sources in terms of wind and solar, 35% type numbers. And so then if anything in there is in that chain, when you get high capital cost items in that chain, if they're low utilization, that starts to really impact your cost structures significantly. So you've got to get, if you're dealing with low utilization assets, you've got to have low cost assets too. That they can't be super capital intensive because the numbers are never going to stack up, sort of thing. So, a few things that have got to be solved in that whole process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
That's been great.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.